Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to have you back in the studio.
It's good to be back in the studio, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
All right.
So we got to get to work here.
That's right.
And talk about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, in the U.S. Senate, and what's going on. There is a lot of talk, but to cut our attention this morning is a letter that Pompeo, our favorite, State Department chairman, Secretary of State, wrote a long letter in the Wall Street Journal, and they tend to disagree with us most of the time, or maybe all the time, on foreign policy. So the very long letter is designed to get the American people and get the members of the Congress, especially the senators who are dealing with this subject right now, on board, and they support our involvement in Saudi Arabia. Now, what is going on here is the war against the Yemenis has been going on a long time, 5 years, and we've been involved and we participate. And then there's this recent killing Khashoggi, and there's a high demand for political reasons, I think, for more than anything, because, people come and go, and some get killed and some don't. But this is one death that's not going unnoticed. And for political reasons, many in government, especially our senators and different people, feel very, very obligated to punish, the Saudis. Which raises the question. They're our best allies. We need them, and we need them for, sell weapons to. We need them for, steady prices in oil, and on and on. So the administration is in a bit of a dilemma. And yesterday there was even a vote in the Senate about this, trying to deal with this, because the strange thing is this one death has replaced these years and years of bloody killing and genocide going on in Yemen, which we've talked about and some senators have talked about, and they've been trying to push these votes, and nobody would listen. But all of a sudden, because there's the possibility that the leader in Saudi Arabia participated in this murder. So this is what it's all about, and I think maybe in some ways it's a distraction, because they ought to be, and they should have been talking about the war a long time ago, but lining up the players is interesting. The senators are lining up, the neocons are lining up, the Wall Street Journal, and also the military-industrial complex. And one country that is very much interested and involved, and have been for a long time, but we don't hear mention, that is, of course, Israel. Mm-hmm. But they have a great deal of interest in this as well.
Yeah, and the op-ed that Pompeo had published in the Wall Street Journal really was astonishing. Both you and I read it a couple times. I know you marked up everything you thought was BS in it, and you had check marks through the whole thing. It's almost as if he wrote something that you had to look through a mirror, because the opposite was true of everything he said. And I think anyone who follows this remotely objectively would look at the editorial that he wrote and say, this just doesn't pass the smell test. It's probably the craziest thing ever written. But he's basically essentially saying we have got to stand by the Saudis because Iran is trying to take over the world. They're pushing their ideology everywhere. They're taking over the Middle East. It's worse than Hitler. It's worse than Al-Qaeda. They're taking everything over. It just is really putting up the scare factor. And we'll go through a few of the crazier quotes. But even from the very first sentence, it's completely kooky, and it's a real psyop, because he says, Trump's effort to rebuild this U.S.-Saudi partnership isn't popular in the salons of Washington. And so he's automatically trying to make it look like, well, they're the outsiders, they're the rebels. No, this is the status quo, as you know, Dr. Paul, for decades. This is the status quo. The Saudis put millions of dollars, they spread it around Washington to buy a lot of yes men. So the whole idea that they're outsiders on this is nuts.
Yeah, and referring to the letter and the way I marked up the article, there are some themes there that really bother me, and that's the disingenuousness of all this. Because the one theme in this letter that Pompeo wrote is it's all the Iranians' fault. Yeah. They caused the whole thing, and if we wouldn't be there, and Pompeo saying if we wouldn't be involved, it would be so much worse, and it would be a total victory for Iran, and they are the ones that started all this. It's not Saudi Arabia's fault at all, and he was defending what he calls, and people refer to that yes. We have to do something about this possible murder. But most important is that we protect American values. And when I hear them bragging about us being someplace for American values, I keep thinking, I wonder if they're talking about the military-industrial complex, profits in that industry. And then American values, a strong national defense, national security. How often have they abused and lied with inferring that we have to do this for national security when it's doing exactly the opposite, which was an argument I made for years about even going into the Middle East. National security required us to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And security always gets worse, and more people killed, and more Americans get killed, and so on and on. But that's what that letter was filled with. It was deceitful, it was wrong, and it's interesting now, though, that Pompeo is very much supporting Trump, which is sometimes that happens. But there's a question on what the CIA is going to be saying about all this.
That's true. And, just going through line by line of what he says, the kingdom, Saudi Arabia, is a powerful force for stability in the Middle East. I mean, that doesn't pass the laugh test. First of all, they funded, they armed, they opened their prisons and sent out thousands of jihadists into Syria to start a civil war in which 500,000 people at least have been killed. They invaded Yemen, as you point out, in 2015, 3.5 years of destroying that country, totally destabilizing. How can you say the Saudis are a force for stability in the Middle East? The opposite is true, and then some.
Yeah, and he'd go along with that argument. No, we're working for stability because we're against the Al-Qaeda. This is part of the war against terrorism, which is another farce. We know more are the enemy of the Al-Qaeda than the man in the moon. But it's a good tool to use. The war on terrorism is anything and everything, and that just justifies, well, we got to protect national security. We need more weapons. We need more monies. The DOD needs this, and it just goes on and on. But there was an incident, a major incident, back in the year 2000 that I remember well because I got caught in the middle of a little skirmish on TV over this, because that was when the U.S. Cole was bombed by some people there, some people who didn't like us and didn't like our military there, probably people that felt like we were invading it, and they didn't like the fact that we used their territory for refueling. And there were some small vessels came along, I think, and they were the ones that more or less bombed. The U.S. Cole did a major amount of damage, and 17 sailors were killed and 39 were wounded. And I remember debating this or talking about it on television. I didn't know it was going to be a debate, and mentioned that we shouldn't be there. What are we doing there? I mean, why do we have to have our ships going into a place like that? And there's a bunch of people who don't like us. And another person on the on the same program, made a pretty explicit charge that qualified me to be anti-Semitic, because that's the first time I really realized what's going on here. So that didn't go over well with me.
It's crazy. And Pompeo brings up the USS Cole in this piece that he wrote. He says that Yemen is an important front in the war on terror, in the fight against Al-Qaeda. Well, if Al-Qaeda did do the Cole in 2000, as you point out, we were in somewhere where we shouldn't be, but the whole idea that we're in Yemen fighting Al-Qaeda is completely disproven, including, and we've mentioned this on the show a couple times, Dr. Paul, the AP, which is hardly an underground, hardly an alternative publication. These guys are awfully close to the intelligence community, very mainstream. They did the investigation. They said that all of our activities in Yemen are helping Al-Qaeda. And certainly all of our rebels in Syria have turned out to be Al-Qaeda or ISIS affiliated. It's the neocons have adopted the Brzezinski plan with the Mujahideen, which is where you arm these radical head-chopping jihadists and hope that something good comes out in the end. Is totally nuts.
Well, I think you could take your statement and apply it as you have in the past to Syria. The same thing. It's all built up. We're in there to secure the world and secure our safety here, and we're, very often on the wrong side of the issue, and that has been what's going on. But the policies that have happened, this is coming up in the Senate because they've been wanting. Rand and some others have been begging and pushing, and they've been refusing to have a vote or get a vote to the floor to vote on Yemen war before the Khashoggi thing came up. And this came up yesterday because they wanted to get another war vote. And the 5 senators who have been pushing for this, Republicans, along with some others, all of a sudden, they were getting more and more support, especially with Khashoggi. So that has served a purpose. They're calling attention. They should have looked at it because of our policy and why we were there and what we were doing, in the Yemen war. But there was a vote yesterday, and it was reversed, and it was a vote on whether or not they would have the debate, on the Senate floor, and the vote shifted, and they won it handily about dealing with this whole issue of Yemen.
Yeah, it was a good vote, and it's something that, as you said, Senator Paul's been working on for a long time. But the funny thing we talked about before the show is that Mattis and Pompeo went down there to twist some arms and give some secret intelligence briefing. I always remember Walter Jones, when he went into some of those secret briefings, he came out and said, they're just lying to us. This is flat out lies. So you can only imagine the kind of garbage they were showing them. But it kind of backfired on them, right, Dr. Paul?
Matter of fact, the opposite happened, and it took Walter a while to learn it, but he was one of the few that I gave credit for who actually was thoughtful. And if he, had the evidence, he'd change his mind instead of this blindness that goes on. They're all bad, but right now I keep looking at some of the so-called progressives that we try to build coalitions with, and they're no more progressive than Man and Moon. It is in tone, but do you think they're anti-war, pro-civil liberties? No, not at all. But Pompeo and Mattis went in there and tried to convert them, and they couldn't do it. But I got into a little friction once with a constituent because I'd said that I don't go to the top level briefing. I did once, and I think it was right after 9/11. I thought, oh, this is important. I have to do it. But my conclusion early on was that there was nothing secret about it. It was a propaganda stunt. Pretend it's secret because they knew all the members of Congress would leak it.
Yeah.
So they go in, and it was never information. It was just to promote, an aggressive foreign policy, a neocon position. So I just couldn't handle it. And I figure I'll know exactly what they said in that meeting in about 10 minutes, because everybody will be talking about it. So that is a farce when they talk about it. Maybe some of these senators started to agree that their message wasn't, because I think that was a closed-door meeting. They were talking to the undecideds.
Yeah.
But it didn't help. It solidified the position that we were holding.
It peeled away 5 more that voted in favor of having a debate on it.
Right.
But this is the funny thing is, though, so they sent Pompeo and Madison there to twist arms, dog and pony show. The senators started getting a little bit mad, and they said, hey, we want the CIA down here. We heard that the CIA concluded that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was personally involved in the killing of this Khashoggi. Send us down the CIA. Let's find out if with certainty they can tell us that this is what happened. The administration said, no, we can't do that. You'll have to settle for Madison Pompeo. So it really, as you say, the propaganda backfired, and 5 senators turned and said, forget it, we're going to vote in favor of having a debate.
Well, I think maybe what's going on there is that the CIA first came out and said that Khashoggi was involved with MBS, and he was involved, and the CIA had that evidence, but that isn't what the administration wanted. And I think there's probably a split in the CIA, and then some taking one position and other the other. And they say, it was the president. Nobody wanted to say that we didn't have him down there. The senators wanted him. It wasn't that somebody in the State Department or anybody in the CIA said she can't go. They said the president did this. The president did it. But my suspicion is that she didn't want to come because she got off the hook because there's a little bit of discrepancy in the position the CIA is holding.
And, we started off talking about the Wall Street Journal running this piece by Pompeo that's really as kooky as it gets. But speaking of the Wall Street Journal, we found out a couple of days ago that the Trump administration has hired a new top advisor to Mike Pompeo. Maybe there was a quid pro quo. He got this editorial board member from the Wall Street Journal, Mary Kissel, her name is, right? And she is, it's fascinating because she was a never-Trumper, hated Trump. What did Trump say about her? Something about how she's a major loser because of her anti-Trump. It reminds me of Nikki Haley. Some of the things Trump said about her, how dumb she is. Then he hired her. So this woman is the number one top advisor to to Pompeo in the State Department. I think we have a tweet that she did a couple of years ago to show you where she's coming from. This woman is total neocon. She's making fun of Trump. Trump thinks we can negotiate with Putin and we'd be better off with Gaddafi and Saddam in power. Let that sink in. Well, yeah, we can negotiate with Putin. What's the alternative? War? And is there anyone with any sense who's not a neocon, because they have no sense, who wouldn't say, okay, Saddam and Gaddafi, not great guys, but look what happened when we gave them their liberty, their liberation. It's much worse there than it was.
And that was about 2 years ago, and I think it has sunk in, and the people agree with us that we shouldn't have done it. It doesn't do any good because the large number of American people now support the position that we should have never gone in. It was a stupid war. It's a position that Trump used to hold and was adamant about, but now's a different story.
And the second-tier neocons like this are full in the administration, unfortunately. But I guess if we're ready to close out, I'll just make one more. I can't resist this from Pompeo's piece. Riyadh, Saudis, is helping manage the flood of refugees fleeing Syria's civil war. Now, that is astonishing. That flood of refugees was created by Saudi Arabia. We had all these fires in California a couple of weeks ago. Can you imagine if they caught the guy that lit the fire, and instead of putting him in the slammer, they gave him an award because he helped put it out? Yeah. It's exactly what the Saudis did. But I would just finally close by thanking everyone who participated on Giving Tuesday for the Ron Paul Institute, which, as you know, puts on this show. There was a great outpouring of support. We're going to tell everyone, we're going to name everyone who supported us. We're going to thank them publicly on the show sometime early next week and thank them on the website. But thank you for participating in Giving Tuesday. Your generous tax-deductible donations allow us to continue things like the Liberty Report, ronpaulinstitute.org, and other projects of the Ron Paul Institute.
Very good. And as messy as this seems, and at times it looks like we don't have an edge and that the neocons have total control, but this last 24 hours, I think they have looked terrible, and then they never stop. And this Kissel that they're pointing, she comes from the Wall Street Journal, and they're all neocons, and they are very, very powerful and influential. But I believe truth wins out in the end, and certainly there's a breakthrough in the Senate. The fact that there are they have enough members switched over yesterday to force a vote on the floor. So, and these were some of the Republicans that switched were not very enthusiastic to do it before, but it has to do with Khashoggi, which is okay that people are concerned. But the point I'd like to make is Khashoggi, as important as that is, well, we also ought to realize that this is all preventable. The message was out there 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Stay out of that area, and we'd all be better off. The Middle East would be better off. Let the people who live there make decisions on what to do with their people and with their land instead of us interfering. But that, we have a long way to go in that, but they're total failure. And I think some of the things going on today is a reflection of the failure of this policy that we have to go about the world, running the world and bring out the great qualities of Americans. And that isn't working, and it isn't going over. And interventionism, whether it's in foreign policy or in economics, it always fails. So what we do need to do is put a much positive light on the principles of non-intervention and the principles of market economy and personal liberty, and we can prevent this from happening. This idea that it's unpreventable and human nature is impossible to change, I don't quite buy into that. It's a difficult thing, and we see repetition, and it comes and goes, but I also believe ideas have consequences, and good ideas have good consequences. So we're in the business of trying our best to understand exactly what's going on, understand the issue, and pass along those good ideas. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.